Good evening. It is 6 o'clock on Tuesday, November the 1st. So I am calling to order this special board meeting of the Wenatchee School District. Welcome all of you to this board meeting. Bienvenidos todos a esta reunión especial. Why are we here today and what is our business? ¿Por qué estamos aquí hoy? ¿Y qué es nuestro asunto? To my left is Superintendent Bill Eagle, in whom I have full confidence. Superintendent Eagle's position is, however, interim. We have his services through the good fortune of a contract with the North Central Educational Services District, which terminates next year on the 30th of June. The board hired consultant McPherson and Jacobson to deliver search services to bring us into the process to find the long-term superintendent who will begin on July the 1st, 2023. At today's meeting, McPherson and Jacobson's two consultants, Dr. Stephen Lauder and Dr. Gustavo Balderas, will start us down the road of the superintendent search effort. And I also welcome Dr. Michelle Huntoon, their colleague, who is also with us. I have asked our consultants to introduce themselves and describe themselves, but I do want to hit these key points before they take over. Both consultants are highly experienced superintendents. Dr. Lauder, as the lead consultant, has been doing searches for 8 years and is based in Vancouver, Washington. Dr. Balderas is the superintendent of Beaverton School District in Oregon and is the current national president of the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents. The consultant's community engagement work will be done in 2 languages, English and Spanish. La consulta comunitaria se realizará en español tanto como inglés. The search process is consultant-led, and so we will be starting that today. The board hired consultants to do this job. A big part of the search for the community is to collect the wishes and opinions from our stakeholders. This will provide valuable information to help look for the right kind of person, to go about recruiting efficiently, and be part of the consideration when the board makes its ultimate hiring decision. We encourage everyone to take advantage of the community engagement opportunities the consultants will offer. And at that point, I will turn the meeting over to Dr. Lauder. We have the consultant's agenda in front of us, and over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that introduction and your explanation of the process. It was very accurate, very good. I think first I'd like to introduce Dr. Michelle Huntoon, who is auditing tonight. She's one of our consultants, and she just wants to be part of the process. Dr. Huntoon, why don't you say hello and say where you are, what you're doing, and what you've done?
Good evening. Thank you. Yes, I have held positions as a consultant, a superintendent, and a chief business official. I am currently the associate superintendent for Eastside Union High School District in California. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Huntoon. You forgot to mention that you were part of the School Services of California for over 10 years.
Yeah, 14 years as an associate vice president. Yes, thank you.
Which was the premier financial group in the state of California. So thank you for that. Dr. Balderas, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you. Gustavo Balderas, superintendent of schools in the Beaverton School District, which is a west side suburb of Portland, Oregon, about 40,000 kids. Previously superintendent in Edmonds, Washington, and also have been a superintendent in California in 2 districts, as well as Eugene, Oregon. So pleasure to be here. Again, as Dr. Lauder mentioned, I am the current president of the Association of Latino Administrators, and hoping to be able to utilize that network to be able to provide you the best service we possibly can.
Well, thank you, Dr. Balderas, and thank you, Dr. Huntoon. And welcome to everyone in the audience as well, and the board members. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to serve your district and your community. Tonight, I probably should say where I come from. I grew up in a small rural community, far north coast of California, logging and fishing, and began as a teacher, principal, teaching principal, superintendent, small districts from 120 kids, K-8, the entire district, to my last district, which was 38,000 kids in the Central Valley of California, very diverse, underserved population. And now I'm retired and working, doing this work, important, very important work to find the best leadership possible for communities and schools, because we know that the longevity of leadership and quality of leadership has a dramatic impact on the services students receive. And so we are mission driven. That's why we do this. We do this because it is important to us. It's our core. It's important to us for our democracy. It's important to us for our communities and all the children that we serve. So thank you for the opportunity. Tonight, we're going to go through a few things with the board. Expectations for the search. If the board has any questions or concerns, we'll address those. We have a draft calendar that the board has received that's very fungible. And since we have actually a good deal of time, we're going to be able to move things around, change things if possible. There are a few glitches in this calendar that we'll talk about tonight as well. The advertising venues we probably won't talk much about. It's pretty standard. It'll be national, local, and the majority of your applicants will be coming from the state of Washington, as is very common, although you'll have applicants from around the area, Oregon, and pardon me. And since we have 125 consultants like Dr. Balderas and Dr. Huntoon around the country, we will be able to recruit highly competent, qualified people who have connections to Washington or to Wenatchee to be part of this search process. We'll talk a little bit about the stakeholder groups tonight and part of how they interact with the calendar. That is actually, we have a lot of time for the stakeholder groups because that process is to gather information for the vetting and for the recruiting, and not so much as for the posting and beginning the application process. The selection criteria, we have already begun that process, and I've interviewed all the board members and heard their thoughts and concerns. And I have a document in front of the board tonight that is a compilation of my thoughts of what I heard people say, and we'll be interested in hearing what's going on in the minds of the board and what they see in front of them. We'll also talk a little bit, just the beginning of the compensation discussion. I have a request in for the current or the previous superintendent contract. And I've also made contact with the Administrators Association of Washington so that we'll be getting some information, current information about salaries. And I do believe the district did a compensation study, but it may be a couple years old, but we'll go back and look at some of those things. And again, that's just the beginning of the conversation. We'll have lots of time to talk about that before the board needs to engage with the new superintendent or the selected superintendent. And then any additional questions or information. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back to the board and ask them if they have any questions or concerns for your search team at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Lauder. I'll look right and then left. Anybody want to bring anything up at this point? No. I'm going to kind of maybe right, maybe wrong. We're all waiting in anticipation. We've read a request for proposals. We, with the exception of Laura, none of us have been through this before. So we're looking for an outline and then learn how to deal with it and go from there. So I think if you were to lead into your agenda, you didn't get any upfront questions, but I'm sure we'll have more later.
Good, thank you. Thank you for that. Let me just briefly go over the process. I don't have a slide at this point for that, but we have the fact that we begin to engage with the district, and then we'll engage with the community, staff, students, parents of the community. We'll advertise, we'll begin to collect applications. We will then gather the educational partners or stakeholder group information to be part of the process. Once applications close, we do a very thorough vetting. We do what we call 3 deep. We don't just stick with their references, we go beyond their references to make sure that the individuals are who they say they are and they have the experience that they say they have. because our process wants to have the best fit. There are a lot of people out there who have the credentials and maybe even the experience to be your next superintendent. That doesn't make them the best fit. Our process is such that 80% of the people that are placed through this process are still in their position after 5 years. And the national average is 3 to 5 years for a superintendent. So our process at the very onset has greater longevity than the national average. And we know that that's very important. We will help the board with the interviews. We will help the board select questions. We'll help the board do what we call phase 5. And that's a critical part of this. Phase 5 is when we talk with the board and the new superintendent and set out, the board selects with the new superintendent 1 to 2, potentially 3 important goals that need to be accomplished during the first year. That's not to say that they're not responsible for every aspect of the running of the district. They are, but these are the 3 things that the board really wants the superintendent to accomplish. And we'll talk about what those end products look like so that there's no confusion at the end of the year, that everybody knows what the targets are and whether the targets are reached. And that's very important to the longevity of the superintendent as well. That's kind of the process in a nutshell, a very short nutshell. At this point then, if you have no further questions about that quick, brief update of the process, I would turn to calendar, but Dr. Balderas, would you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I think you said it well, Steve. I think, just making sure that we have the best fit for the school district, and making sure again that folks understand the importance of the community sessions as we begin to vet the candidates and recruit for the pool. I think Wenatchee is going to be again a very attractive district. Washington State, as I've stated before, is a very attractive state. So looking forward to this opportunity. But I think you covered everything, Steve.
Thank you, Dr. Balderas. If
I might intervene now because I've got 3 sort of questions, but I think they might help the discussion later on. And one thing I want to say is all 5 of us are going to speak individually as we're starting cold, I think, but cold but enthusiastic. And so I think every board member is free to express whatever they wish right now. I do want to touch on the phase 5 and the importance of this being a success. I think we all need to work together. And I've been looking at this, trying to understand the process with not just finding, but implementing and succeeding. And so I think that's a very good thing. And I'm glad you mentioned it. When you get on to stakeholders and things, I would like to learn a little bit about, in the language, profile versus criteria. We have kind of 2 stages. One is going out and announcing the position and getting candidates interested. The other is what I see as criteria when it comes to actually deciding who are the most qualified candidates and who fits. And in the original request for proposal, we had 2 phases of stakeholder engagement at the interview and earlier on. As you go through your timetable, if you could clarify how you're scheduling that, perhaps ask us questions, I'd appreciate that. And the other one, I said we can all be personal. I think sometimes we may not want one-stop shopping if we've got to canvass all of us together and reach a position. We have staff to rely on. I know we've set up that our communications director and Kim White, our executive, there are hubs for you to work out arrangements, and we've delegated a lot of work to them. But I think if we can get us comfortable in the relationship between our technical partners here, the board itself, you, and if we've got to, if we can't take an instantaneous consensus, I think that was another thing that you said in your proposal that was changed. The way I looked at it from when I started is you talk about a consensus-driven proposal, which means we're working together. It's got loose edges, and I think that's a good dynamic way to go forward. Anyway, that to me can kind of set the tone a little bit if you see those things and want to explain them.
Well, I think if I understand your question, the process, we have a protocol that we use and recommend. But in the end, this search process is the board's process. And at any point along the way, the board can intervene or change or modify the process. When we talk about calendar, we can talk about interviews and interfaces with candidates. The early stage is the stakeholder or educational partner outreach, where we ask for questions of the community and staff and students to help us understand the community, the districts, the issues, and what qualities and characteristics the individuals that we'll be talking with would like to see in the next superintendent. And we'll talk about some of those from our board interviews as well. We'll talk a little bit about the interview process, which provides the community and the board an opportunity to bring more people into the process. I think it's important to be very clear from the very beginning that while we ask for input for the board during this process, by law, it is the board's role and responsibility to select the next superintendent. So by way of engaging the community, the staff, the students, parents, we will be getting information to inform the board's decisions. And it's important that people know from the very beginning that they don't rank, nor do they select the candidates, but they do provide information to the board about the strengths and perceived weaknesses of each of the individual candidates. And if the board so chooses, we recommend a two-stage interview process, whereby, of course, the traditional board interview process, but also there is an interview team that would consist of staff, students, community members, parents. And again, that team also informs the board in writing of their perceptions of the strengths and weaknesses of the candidates that would be used in the deliberations the board will have after their interviews are completed. Does that answer the question or questions?
I don't know. Martin will have to answer that question.
Okay, I was looking to see if any of my colleagues wanted to come in at that point. I think it does. I think when you've given us a draft timetable, my questions were more related to when we get to that timetable or selecting stakeholders to understand mechanically as well as in terms of goals, what might be questions, and possibly you could explain why you've got it this way, your experience, and then we can attempt to understand it. That's really where I was coming from.
I do have a question, though, of my own. So you talked about stakeholders need to understand that they are not ranking nor choosing the superintendent, and that is the job of the board, which is true. And so from your experience, can you please explain how we're inviting people to come in and to participate? And it was a big, heavy lift for folks last time, at least. I don't know how much of a big, heavy lift you're expecting from our stakeholders this time. But some of the concerns that were raised was that their input was not valued. They were not honored or appreciated in what they did bring forward to the process. So how can we change that dynamic going forward in this process so that we invite people in to help us out and we honor, appreciate, and value their input?
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. In my experience, it is usually these feelings of disenfranchisement come from the fact that there's a misunderstanding about the role of the participants. If that role is unclear, and that's why I said from the very beginning, it's important to be very clear what the role of the community staff, students, and parents are in this process. It's a very important role for a number of reasons. They are providing you important information about their thoughts and concerns about the individuals that are out there. But I think it's very important that they know that their role is limited because of the laws surrounding the hiring of the superintendent. You want to engage your community, your staff, and your students and your parents, but you need to make sure that they understand at what level they can be engaged. In my experience in the numbers of searches that I've done, we have never had the feeling you described, where people felt that they were disenfranchised or that their input was not important or useful. So I do think that if you rely on the process and trust the process, that part of it, and we explain this part of it in each of our stakeholder meetings, and people understand from the very beginning what their role is, and that we value that. It's very important to us.
And to the other part of the question, to what level do you anticipate folks being involved? Is it a 1 hour event? Is it a 2 hour? Is it multiple meetings? What is it?
So part of this is also at the will of the board. Pardon me, but traditionally what we have are community stakeholder meetings. We have, I think we're scheduling for 2 days in district where we'll have multiple meetings during the day, where we can have individual groups and either groups that the board chooses to invite, or basically an open forum where anybody from the community can come and provide input. As well, we will have the same questions posted on your, your website. It's a SurveyMonkey, but they have an opportunity to provide their written input, which, by the way, a lot of people prefer the written input because sometimes people don't feel comfortable saying things in public in front of a lot of other individuals for lots of different reasons. So there is the public input. There is the input that we can gather from the SurveyMonkey survey that we have. We will also offer Zoom meetings where people they don't have to leave their home. They have lots of responsibilities, family and job, etc., but they can join via Zoom. So there is an opportunity for them to be engaged there. We also recommend that when we get to the stage of the finalists, those you will interview, that you generate with our assistance some questions that we ask and interview each of those candidates and have them answer on a recorded Zoom meeting, which will then be posted. And we can also have a similar SurveyMonkey response to people's reactions to those recorded videos. And that can happen depending upon how the board sets up their interviews. But if we have a week during which we have the interviews, then people have time to view those recorded Zooms and provide input to the board. And the board, by the way, gets all of the data from the SurveyMonkey. The only thing that we take out are things that would be any individual's name or any profanity. Other than that, you get all of the raw data. You get everything that's there because it's not our data, it's your data. And we also recommend that that data gets posted so that individuals can see what others have said and the candidates can see as well. Traditionally, there's always some negative people and negative comments in there, but that's a common thing for a very complex organization. And I think that we should not be shy about sharing those thoughts. The vast majority of thoughts are always positive about the community, the staff, and the schools. And then I also mentioned earlier about the two interview teams. That's also another process. During the interview week and the interview day, if you choose a single candidate per day, that candidate will be engaged with staff in forums or meetings, students, with community members, with any elected officials, and there can even be, time permitting, a public forum where individuals can all come, where that candidate can make a presentation about their skill set, their experiences, and why they would like to be the next superintendent for the Wenatchee School District. And again, still opportunities for individuals to provide written comments or SurveyMonkey comments that would go back to the board for their review prior to your decision.
Okay, so follow-up question to that. In regards to the open forums and stakeholder meetings, what is your common practice or recommendation regarding any board involvement, observation, or participation in those meetings?
It's really up to the board. Our recommendation, again, it's a recommendation, it's your process, is that board members don't attend those staff meetings, student meetings, or administrator meetings, and those kinds of meetings because people sometimes feel that they can be more free without either administrators or board members being there, like the superintendent shouldn't be involved in those meetings either. Having said that, board members have attended and it's been fine. But that's just our recommendation. The board would certainly be free to watch all of the videos, any of the recordings, and you're going to have access to all of the data, not only about the applicants, but also the information that comes from the SurveyMonkey and our responses from our meetings that we come in and do in-house for those 2 days.
One more question. You said that the information from the survey, you remove inflammatory, derogatory information, whatever the word was you used, but profanity, excuse me. Okay. So, but you also mentioned names. So does that include the name of the candidate that's being commented on? Like, I really enjoyed the way Dr. So-and-so interacted with the blah, blah, blah. Those will be there.
No, it would be something, let me give you an example that's hypothetical. It might be that we don't like the current superintendent's process to do this sort of thing and name the person or the individual who is the assistant superintendent because they do this and whatever. So we would take that individual's name out of that. We try to make them non-identifiable if possible, but you get the raw data. You get everything that people say or write.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I didn't want to jump ahead and look at the calendar, but it sounds like this process does envision 2 levels of stakeholder involvement, the helping set the criteria and then some amount of participation in the selection interview process, because that's looking at this, it looked really heavy on the criteria side, but not as much involved in the participation side. And I didn't know if you were going to, and it sounds like you've covered it a little bit more, but it does sound like there's more opportunity on the selection side, which I think is where most people are going to be interested in having feedback heard.
I would agree with your comment. I think that both of those pieces are critical to the process for lots of different reasons. But I do think that people want to be heard. And I think that based upon your past experiences and the tenor of the community and staff currently, the board can pick and choose on how they engage community staff, students, and go forward from there. Again, I would caution that we are very clear in all of these steps that these individuals are providing input for your consideration and not ranking or selecting. Any other questions? Okay. So I would like to share my screen and go to the calendar if I can. There, draft timeline, and I want to do this. Can people see this? Can you see my screen?
Can't read it. It's too small.
Too small. Okay, let me do this.
We can read it, but it won't be readable for others. Yeah,
That's better.
that's good. I think.
Okay, good. Good, that's good. I can probably make it a little bit bigger. Yes. So the first event is tonight. That's our meeting, and we've already talked about some of the items we'll be talking about tonight. And so that's the agenda we've already discussed. As soon as we get consensus to move forward with the criteria, we can advertise the position, and hopefully on or about the 7th, could be as early as the end of this week, we can open the application process and we'll begin to advertise the position in the venues that were selected or are part of our proposal. The week of the 22nd through 23rd, this is the fungible piece. We were trying to get something in before the Thanksgiving break, which may not work. I know Dr. Balderas is available during that week, but I'm not sure. I know a lot of people tend to leave. He would certainly be doing the Spanish language focus groups or forums. And potentially we could do some work with staff and administrators and even a public forum. But that may not work just because of timing. And it's okay that we don't have anything in November. We can work with December and even in January. So we can push that out. It's not going to stop the process. It's not going to hold us up. But we were just trying to get a jump start on that. Thoughts or comments about that week? I know it's a short week and it's a tough week.
I personally think that week should be out. I just think there's too much travel distraction with holidays. I don't even think there's school on the 23rd. If there is, it's a half day. You know, I know some people are around, sure, but I just think that's a tough week to get people to commit to a process like this. And I have no problem pushing it to the next week to get started.
Okay. So what we'll do is, sorry, go ahead, please.
Just agreeing with that thought.
Okay, good. All right.
We'll agree.
Just agreeing.
Just agree. Okay. Now I would look around on the timetable because we realized it was very, very tight trying to do it the week before Thanksgiving. And I think the week afterwards, but I just want to get a wider consensus as to where we think we'll get the best participation, and a little more planning won't help. Okay. So it looks like we might want to do that the week after Thanksgiving.
Okay, what we'll do is we'll work with consultant staff and try to come up with your Kim White about potential dates and organization of that next week. Okay.
Right, and we will need to coordinate. I didn't check that week for anything else that's happening in the district, but we can do that. This brings up one other thing generally, like we're trying to kind of settle this in a one-stop shop today. I think we're going to find, this is a personal opinion, that sometimes you can't get it sorted out that quickly, and we've got to have a mechanism for making prompt decisions, maybe in principle, and delegating to somebody else to set up the arrangements. And as you go through this calendar and we see things like that, any comments from your experience of how to handle that situation would be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you for that comment. You know, and again, I think that the important part of this is we are beginning this process in plenty of time. We can extend dates, we can extend deadlines. That's not going to hurt us. And it really comes down to what's happening in the district, how people are feeling, whether you have activities that are in conflict with what we would like to do. We're really quite flexible, and we're able to move things around. Again, I just wanted to note that traditional stakeholder groups, administrators, classified staff, students, teachers, community, parents, it could be elected officials. We've talked about that. And certainly more meetings can be scheduled in December and January at the will and convenience of the ability of us and for you to work things out within the district. What I've ballparked in January is and again, this really comes down to when we can get input from the stakeholders. You have a meeting, I believe, on the 10th. What we would suggest is if we can arrange those meetings, we could come to you and provide a report on how those meetings went, what we heard, what the themes were. We would briefly discuss where we're going with questions. What I'd like to do with interview questions is provide some sample questions for the board to review offline, have each individual board member mark a couple. For example, if we have 2 interview teams, you would select 2 questions from each of the categories. And the categories are driven by your characteristics and qualities that we'll talk about later tonight. We talk briefly again about how you want to proceed with the interviews. If you want to have 1 candidate per day, 2 candidates per day, depending upon the will of the board. We really like to recommend that you have 1 candidate per day and run them through, a 10 or 12-hour day where they meet staff, they have opportunities for public input. We also recommend an earlier interview with the stakeholder team that we talked about, the community, the staff, the students, administrators. And then this is a unique part of our process. We recommend, if the board chooses, to have an informal dinner with the candidate that day, and no scripted questions. It's just a dinner where you have a chance to talk. You could talk about baseball, you could talk about the weather. And the reason we do that is that you get a different take. It's important that the individual and any significant other feel not only comfortable with the community, with the area, but also feel that they are a fit and the board and the community is a fit with them. So you see the written paperwork, you're going to see them present, you're going to see their formal presentations, and this gives the board an opportunity to see the individuals on a different level. And it is, it's not unique, but it is unusual, but it really provides the board, I think, with valuable information about the individuals that they've selected as their finalists. And then again, we'll continue to talk about compensation packages. If this calendar is amenable to the board, we would have a closing date for applications on or about the 12th. We can again push that out if the board would like, but that's certainly sufficient time. And it also gives us the holiday break in December so that individuals are not at work. They can complete their applications and submit their paperwork online. And just a note about the process. The majority of the highly competent, qualified people come in the last couple of days. Boards will always say, well, how many have applied? Are they good candidates? You know, are we getting good people? Are we gonna need to extend? And my answer to that is trust the process. If in fact the 12th comes and we don't have sufficient quality or quantity of applicants, which I do not believe will happen, we can talk about extending it at that time. Again, we have plenty of time to extend if we need to. I don't think we'll need to. We take at least 2 weeks to vet these candidates, and that's a very important part of this process. We need at least 2 full weeks to go ahead and get through this process, and that's a little bit more than that. But that fits in with the next meeting on the 31st of January, which I believe this should be a special meeting. You can't do this particular piece during your regular board meeting. There's just, you need too much time to do this part. And let me talk to you about what we're going to do. We're going to bring you from all of your applicants, those who we find to be the best fit and those who have passed the vetting background. And again, let me say, it's not just references. We go 3 deep. We'll talk to people who work with them. We'll talk about people who may be from ESDs or from county boards, whatever, if they're coming from a different state, they have different organizational structures. We'll talk to individuals in their community about who these people are and how they performed. And that's a very important piece. So we need that time. We'll share that information. We'll share a list of all the applicants. The board in closed session will be talking to us about, well, here's a candidate. Why didn't you select them or bring them forward? And we'll be able to tell you the reasons why we've done what we've done. At that meeting, the board will select those they wish to interview, the finalists. And the other things are really open session, but the selection of the candidates and the review of candidates occur in an executive session, a closed session, which is not a public session. We in open session can review the questions again if we need to. We can finalize interview schedules if we need to. And again, that's on there twice, but finalize the interview schedules. That is a very important special meeting. We need to focus all of our energy on reviewing the videos that the candidates will have recorded that are separate from the Zoom videos that we talked about. They'll be answering 3 questions. What's their style? What the first 90 days looks like? And the third question, leadership style, first 90 days. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on that third question, but it's only about 3 minutes each. So you get a little snippet. You'll see all the paperwork, our review and our comments, and the board can ask questions and then go from there. We've ballparked February 6th through the 10th For interviews, again, fungible, something can change there for lots of different reasons. Our recommendation is 1 candidate per day. I would not recommend 5 days. I would only recommend that the board select down to 3, no more than 3 for just practical purposes. If you get more than 3, you begin to lose track of who said what when, and it becomes a bit of a blur. So 3 candidates is a nice number. You can keep them separate. It's a very workable number of people to work with for your finalists. But again, it's up to the board. If they see there are 4, certainly we would do that and work with you on the number of candidates that you wish to interview. We've also ballparked a time for site visitations after the interviews. Normally what happens is the board in executive session after their last interview will have a discussion about their feelings about the candidates, review the data that you've been given via the SurveyMonkey, the written data that you might have received either from the Zoom video recordings and all through the process. So that data will be there for you. You will have a chance to see much of that before your final discussion. And ideally at that time, you will have come up with a final candidate and you'll direct us, the team, to intervene and talk to that finalist and the others, because we promise that we'll tell everyone that has moved to that level where they are in the process as soon as possible. And that site visitation would be a subset of the board, not the full board, 1 or 2 board members. If you have 1 finalist, then certainly you'd only have to do 1 site visit. If you have 2 that you're still considering, then you would do 2. Now, this is where the process could extend. If you end up having more than 1 finalist after your interviews, you may decide to have a second round interview, which is certainly acceptable. At this point in the process, what we're saying is we believe the board will be able to come to a consensus around a single candidate for their next superintendent. After the site visitation and a confirmation by the board that they feel comfortable that this person really is who they say they are, the board comes back and then makes a selection of the new superintendent. And starting date would certainly be the 1st of July. Now, this is a rough draft calendar, but it kind of outlines everything except the details of the day of interviews and the interview process, which are yet to be discussed. And whether we do candidate forums, Zoom forums, those kinds of things for each of the individual finalists. Questions about calendar?
Can I suggest that we put it in 2 parts? You've given a good description of the how and why of the steps. And I think I'd like all our board members to have an opportunity to make sure they're comfortable and understand that first. And then when I look at the particular schedule, I have, call them nitpicky questions about how we're going to do it and timing. And I don't think we want to get bogged down in those. You said it's fungible, but I think if the big picture, how do we feel about your overall proposal gets discussed first. And at that point, I'll look around the board and see if there are any questions.
So you mentioned the interview team with stakeholders. Where does that fit in the timeline?
So they would be, pardon me, during the week of the February 2nd through the 10th on this proposed timeline. Okay. They would interact during the days of the interviews. If the board chooses to have that second team, that would consist of, let me say how they're selected. Some boards like to have each individual board member nominate 1 or 2 individuals from the community and or parents. We'll talk about limitations of numbers in a second. We always ask that the associations, your employee associations, nominate 2 individuals so that the board can select 1 of the 2 to move forward. And that could be your administrator's team, it could be your teaching staff, your support staff, etc. And so they have representation on this team as well. There usually is a process by which you nominate a student or possibly 2 depending upon the numbers of the interview team. We'd like to keep the team to about 10 if we can do it. And so it becomes problematic. You can't have 2 of each of the board members, community or parents on the interview team and have representation from all of the associations, the administration and the students. You know, if you get to 12, you're still okay. But I know some boards have wanted to have, you know, as many as 20, and it just becomes problematic. It becomes rather large group, and it's difficult to kind of manage the process with too many people in the room during the interviews. Okay, so that's where the stakeholder interviews would be, are on the week of the 6th through the 10th. And during that week, again, that's when you would be posting your Zoom video recordings of your finalists, answering the questions the board have decided to ask them, usually like 3 questions. Other community input would come from during the same week would be if you choose the full day interview process, there will be a lot of interaction time between those candidates and staff and community and students, administration, parents, and they have an opportunity to provide you input. So this week, if this is the week you select for your interviews, is full of those interactions and lots of data gathering for the board's decision-making during the last interview day.
So to clarify, during that interview week, is the board itself as a body going to individually interview each of the candidates?
That's a great question. Thank you for that clarification question. The board usually meets in the afternoon, and I know the board, I think, traditionally meets about 6. It depends on whether you select a dinner process or not, because you'll need about an hour for the dinner and an hour for the interview, and a few minutes after for a little general discussion about that particular interview. So the board interacts in the evenings with each candidate. If the board is free, they certainly can go to the forums at their will. We just ask that you don't have a quorum at the meeting, so no more than 2 of the board members at any particular forum or meeting.
Okay, I need just further clarification. It sounded to me like you said that the board, as the 5 of us, have 1 hour to meet with each person, and then we have dinner with them. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's a good clarification. What we recommend is that you have the dinner prior to your formal interview. So dinner is about an hour and the interview is about an hour, depending upon the number of questions you select.
Not liking that. Not liking it at all.
Well, you certainly can modify or change it however you wish.
Yeah, it just seems, it just seems a little backwards to me if we have not had the opportunity to interview the folks and see how we like them professionally in interactions with us, that we then decide, that we want to spend social hour basically having dinner with them. But I would really like to interact with the person as a full board, interviewing a serious interview, maybe more than an hour, maybe more than an hour. The way you're describing it makes it feel like the board is heavily involved on the front end, establishing the criteria, establishing the profile, and very little time spent actually engaging with the candidates themselves. That doesn't feel right to me.
Well, some boards decide to have 2 rounds of interviews, and they change up how they do the interviews. The first interview can be a set of standard questions that we give, and the second interview can be questions driven from the first round of interviews. You could do that. It depends, again, on how you'd like the process to run. Sometimes they're back to back. For example, if you have your first round, let me see, if you would almost have to do 2 per day to do this, but we can work out a schedule whereby you choose to have individuals in for one round and then the next day have a second round. That's quite possible as well. The board would be more on tap to be able to be free maybe during the morning hours versus just only in the evenings to make something like that work. But there are lots of opportunities, lots of ways of changing.
Can I interrupt? I'm sorry. The other part that's striking me as odd, and I do want to hear from the other board members about this, is that it seems odd to me, if I'm hearing you correctly, that we're selecting finalists. We're selecting finalists before we actually interview anybody. Seems like we should select who we wish to interview, then select, bring that group down. I'm confused by.
Well, let me try to clarify. At the meeting of the 31st, we review all of the candidates and provide you with the insight that we've gained. You get a chance to view the candidates answering the 3 questions on video. You get to select then who you would like to interview further. It depends on the number of highly competent, qualified people as they come forward. And the number of people that the board wishes to interview. And then they interview those individuals. But if you want to extend the number of days of interview or the number of interviews, we can do that. We can work with that. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but please help me.
I'm interested to hear what other board members' perspective or thoughts about that are.
Yeah, I don't have as much on the, when we get the qualifications, whether we need an interim interview and then select finalists. It does seem like there's something missing there that needs to be refined, because so that we have the opportunity to vet candidates and select maybe 5 and then maybe 3 finalists. What I had in my head that struck me from hearing how this community final interview process works is I had envisioned it more maybe like how we've done our principal interview team, where we've got the community groups, 4 separate larger groups that they go around room to room, that allows more participation in that sense. It struck me as odd that we just have one team that represents all of these various groups as a potential. I know we don't want too many cooks in the kitchen and things like that, but that's how it seems like it's worked fairly well when we do it for the principal searches, having the various groups and every candidate finalist, whether it's top 5, top 3, interact with those community groups.
A couple thoughts for you. The speed dating concept, which you're kind of describing as the candidate goes from room to room to room, which is kind of the speed dating idea, which is fine. What I will strongly suggest is that you're not going to be able to engage 6 or 8 people in this level. They just are not going to do it. They're not going to risk their own positions and be exposed when they only have 1 chance in 5 of moving forward. The odds are just too great against them, and the risk is too high for the individual to be exposed. That's why we recommend you come down to 3. 1 in 3 is a much better ratio and odds if you're going to risk doing this. Now, having said that, if the board chooses and they want 5 or 6 people to go through the speed dating concept, you can do that. I would just suggest that you're going to lose candidates, highly competent, qualified candidates, because they don't want the exposure at that kind of risk level.
I'm going to turn that question around and say, what's the risk to the district if we don't do a more extensive process? And maybe what we do is be open to having 5 interviewed only by the board. And if they are interviewed only by the board and not by the stakeholder groups in that phase, then they wouldn't have that exposure or the risk of that. And then if we then bring it down to 2 or 3 or however many, then they can go to the stakeholder. I think that solves both problems, but we don't know how many applicants we're going to get. And after we sift through the portfolios of each of them, we may not have 5 that are interesting to us. So I think we in some ways have to keep it kind of open, but I do want the board to be involved as a body, interviewing all the candidates before we announce to the public who the finalists are?
Certainly, we can work with the board, and if you want to do some kind of preliminary interview process, we can do that. This is a traditional process that works well, but if you want to modify it, remember I said from the very beginning, this is your search. If you want to do something different than our recommendation, it's very common and acceptable. I'll provide you with my experience and my commentary on what I think maybe some of the pitfalls may be. But in the end, you guys get to make the decision, and we'll be here to support you with whatever decision you make as a board. Other questions?
If I'm understanding correctly, the alternative to that is that you as a search firm find the final three, and that is, no, the three that we're talking about interviewing instead of 5. Is that what I'm understanding?
No, I'm sorry. It's confusing. I apologize for that. We'll bring forward the entire applicant pool. We'll bring forward likely 6 to 8 individuals who meet your qualifications, who have passed the deep background vetting that we have done. The board will then select from the pool. You could select from the entire pool if you wish, even though we would not have done the deepest background on the entire pool. We will do it on those who, we'll get candidates who apply for every position in the country. They have never been a superintendent. They have no experience. So we're not going to do a big background check on that individual. They don't rise to the level of your qualifications. So those people will be in the pool. There will be those people in the pool that we know aren't competent qualified because of their work history. So we're not going to do a deep background check on them because we've done a preliminary screening. The top group, before you select finalists, again, could be 6 to 8, depending upon the number of people that rise to that level. From that group, the board will then select the finalists. If you want to interview 5 or so as a preliminary interview, you certainly can do that. We talked about that. But traditionally, the board selects those finalists after we've done the vetting for you, which that's why you hire us, is to provide you with that top layer of candidates. And again, they're not people that we are promoting. They are people who we believe to be fitting your criteria, that we feel, based on the information we've received from you and the community and staff, are the kinds of individuals that seem to be best fit for your position in your community. Again, we can modify the process to fit your needs.
Okay, so what I'm understanding then is the difference in between what we're talking about is you're saying limit it to 3, and Laura, you're saying we want to limit it to more, or what's
No,
that?
I
no.
wonder
What I,
if
can I
I can
clarify
walk
what I-
through. Okay, I
Can I just want to clarify what I'm saying first. So what I'm the piece that I see that is missing is that on this meeting on the calendar for January 31st, it says that we are going to select finalists. But at that point, the board has had no direct interaction with any of those people. We have the vetting, which is awesome and great, but we haven't had any direct interaction with any of the candidates before we're being asked to select our finalists. And I heard 3 is the number that they're recommending.
Yeah.
So I would like to add a step in there somehow where the board has direct interaction, not just watching them interview on Zoom with somebody else. I think that the board needs to be able to interact with the final candidates before we select our 3 finalists or 5 finalists or whatever those might be. That's what I'm saying.
Right, so how many, how many of those candidates, and how do we, I mean, it's kind of, you see what I'm saying, how it seems like it's kind of taking over their job of presenting us the.
No. They have vetted, and they would say they were going to bring us 6 to 8. So, okay, yeah. 6 to 8, they're vetting. And we're going to look over the materials that they bring us for those 6 to 8 people. And maybe we see 3 right off the bat. Oh, those look really good. Or, yeah, these 3 look good, but gosh, that, 4 and 5 are kind of interesting. Could we do a short interview with all of them so that we can see they look on paper, they look on, somebody else in interview, how are they interacting with us? And then decide who are the 3 we want to move forward to the final. They've done their vetting. I'm not taking anything away from the McPherson-Jacobson process at all. Just adding a little piece of board interaction is my request.
And I tend to agree with that too. I'd really like that opportunity to have an initial interview with a broader pool. Maybe that be the 5 if we select based on the scaling back and the criteria and come out of the executive session having decided who we want to invite for preliminary interviews and invite, have at least an initial interview with 5. And then from those interviews, then select up to 3 that would be through a more in-depth interview with the community stakeholder groups and potentially doing the interview with the informal dinner. I just think the more opportunities we have to interview with, to meet with anyone that could be in this position is better, because they get more comfortable, we get more comfortable every time. And it can be significant from first interview to end.
And so one of
If they're not local, we can do those by Zoom. They don't have to make multiple trips here.
I would kind of like to walk through this step by step so we clarify the choices. So step 1 is you do the vetting and you have, say, 6 to 8 candidates. And then we've got 2 potential interview stages, semifinalist and finalist. After that, you have a situation which I think is valid, that nobody wants to come and be public when the odds aren't that great. So I think Laura is talking about from the 8, the board would then call it a paper and video assessment to reduce that number of 8. Is that correct? Is that?
Who are you asking?
I'm asking the McPherson and Jacobson point. So
I think what I'm hearing is that the preliminary interview, and I would strongly recommend that it be a Zoom interview for lots of reasons, confidentiality being one of them. You don't want people driving in and out of your district saying, oh, everybody says, oh, there's candidate so-and-so because whatever, he's coming in for their interviews. That would then allow you to do that interaction prior to selecting for a final round of interviews. It's just a little twist on 2 rounds of interviews. That can work out well. I mean, we're just going to have to adjust the schedule a little bit to accommodate time and the ability for the board to discuss prior to selecting for the final round interview.
Yeah, and you talked about recommending 2 rounds of interviews. So you called it the perimeter interview, and that's what I'm calling paper and video from 8 to a pre-selection. Then perhaps we do a Zoom interview, keeping matters confidential, and we address that issue. Is that, I'm looking around, that's what, and that interview from 8 to let's say 3 to 5, then you would follow with potentially 2 more on-site visits, or how would you put that together?
On-site visits, to your district, is that what you're saying, on-site visit?
I'm trying to separate the steps. Yeah.
So, okay, as I'm hearing it, what the board is suggesting, or at least some of the board members are suggesting, is a preliminary interview round of a top group. And that could be 5 or 6. It depends on the number of individuals that rise to the top. And that would be, my suggestion, or the team's suggestion, would be a Zoom interview. From that Zoom interview, preliminary interview, then the board comes to a decision about who they want to select for the finalists. And then we go into the deep potentially all day interviews where the people are in front of so many groups, staff, students, parents, etc. And again, our recommendation is a community staff student interview team that provides written information about strengths and weaknesses. And then they go into another board interview. And you could then also have your dinner, which gives you, and again, not all boards have the dinner, but we believe that it does provide you with another layer of information about each of the the candidates. And again, I think it fits into what the board has been saying. We want as much information. We want to know as much about the fit with us as we can. And then you make your selection of your finalist, and then do, or your top candidate, do a site visitation, which is another layer of vetting for the board, and come back and confirm that and announce the new superintendent.
So you mentioned, that watching the pre-recorded 3-question interviews. Can we skip that step and just do the preliminary interviews?
Well, I think that it's important that you see that those videos in the meeting where you select who you want to interview, and whether it's a first round interview or you go just directly to the 1-round interview. I think that's important, and that's why you need.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I didn't think. Yeah, because honestly, I mean, if we're looking at from 6 to 8 candidates, we would narrow it down, hopefully, to, I don't know, 5, 6, and then do.
Yeah, what I would envision is in that executive session, we're presented with their 6 to 8 that rose to the top. And we'd look at that, we'd listen to their videos, we'd consider that, and we'd come out of that meeting selecting maybe 5 that we wanted to do preliminary interviews with, no more than probably that. And then from those 5, narrowing it down to the top 2 or 3 that consider the finalists. So that's how I have it.
And do we get access to their CVs and whatnot prior to the 31st?
You will. You'll be required to sign a confidentiality agreement, and then that information you'll be able to view in a Dropbox. So the files will be in there. You'll be able to review them prior to our meeting when we discuss who we're bringing forward to you.
Okay. I'm not opposed to the dinner idea. We're currently going through this process at where I work, and except they have 2 hours and 45 minutes for dinner and interview. And they actually do the dinner before the interview.
Is the dinner truly informal, or is that also considered under the OPMA? Yeah, so it's part of executive session, basically. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it would be part of executive session. But there's we recommend no formal interview questions. The board chooses, you can ask some formal questions. The idea about not having questions to answer is that it's a relaxed and comfortable interaction with an individual on a human level, and their significant other, if they have one and they choose to bring them, which we recommend they do, because this is a fit for, if there's a couple, it's a fit for both of them. It's not just the person who's going to be your superintendent. But yes, it would be covered by executive session.
I want to ask some timetable questions, which will affect how much time we've got if we talk about how we're doing that. You stressed the value of, let's say, the 1st of December going out to initiate the publicity and that people are interested. If I look at the post-January schedule here and compare it to their request for proposal, which was based on as a calendar we were given as a suitable calendar, this is about 1 month more accelerated than what was in our request for proposal. And so I would like to know your assessment from a point of view of being successful as to, you've said that we can delay if we have to, but do you see time being time critical and being a little early, and therefore closing applications early in January as opposed to the end of January, and doing interviews in February rather than March? Could you comment on that?
Sure. Gustavo, you want to comment as a sitting superintendent? I can comment as a retired superintendent, but I've been doing all the talking tonight. Do you want to answer that question about timing, or your thoughts about being a candidate in a situation like that?
there's certain seasons for superintendents and the hiring seasons. I think, you're getting in front of this a bit and making sure that what I like about it as a superintendent, that if you're looking for applicants, it gives them, the window to be able to complete paperwork effectively. I think that window and that opportunity during winter break is optimal for a lot of candidates that sit down if they have a significant other to discuss career plans and make a choice and do a deep dive in terms of the community. So I think if people are looking at Wenatchee, they would come in, even visit the campus or even visit the district during the winter break. And just to be, and I see that often with candidates. They'll come in on a weekend, talk to people and check out the community and be able to provide timing. So to me, it's just the opportunity to be able to have time to be able to complete the paperwork. As Dr. Lauder was saying, a lot of candidates do complete the paperwork the last couple of weeks or a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, because they're trying to rush through it. But if given an opportunity, I think, again, and I've stated it, Wenatchee is a very attractive place. So I think having a good pool of candidates is not going to be an issue. It's just trying to get down to the right number that the board wants to look at. And your process that you've stated, having a first and second interview, I've seen that before, and it does work well with candidates and boards. And really what we're trying to do, and I think what the board needs to really feel comfortable with is it the right fit for you, and having enough time with the candidate to ensure that it's a right fit for the board, because again, you are the community, you're elected by the community. So I think that's critical. But the timing of it all, I think it's a hiring season, but I think you're also in front of it. You're early enough where I think it's, to me as a sitting superintendent, if we were looking, this is the prime season that you're getting into right now. You're in what I call the sweet spot, because you're in front of it compared to some others that are a little bit later in the process.
I would also suggest that if we were to push out the interviews and the final selection a week or two, it's not going to be a make or break issue. As I said, we have flexibility within our timeline. We just don't want to push it out too far. So mid-February, end of February, I would like to try to keep it to that. I would not like to have to get into March if we can avoid it.
Okay. If you go, the later you get in the process, there will be candidates that take other positions.
Okay.
So I think that's something to consider as well. So being in front of it, when I say being in front of it in the hiring season, it's you get the first look at a lot of quality candidates, and others will be off what I call the board per se, if the longer you move on the process.
Okay. Well, looking around at the other faces and listening to you, that makes sense to me. We've got kind of a week of slack time. I assume we can massage the precise timetable after January. And that seems to be good advice, and we need to make that adjustment as compared to our original timetable. Anybody disagree? No. Okay. And it does sound like the board consensus is that we would like to do some kind of Zoom personal interview on the vetted list.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we can go. And I think the strength of the candidates and the numbers might influence how you go from there onwards from there.
We can do that. We can get you, we'll change the calendar and add that to it, and get that out to the board for their review. And then we'll get a chance to post those important dates
Okay.
on the website. Okay. Any other calendar comments?
I just want a quick clarification. When we do the stakeholder group meetings from the listed groups here, classified staff administrators, these stakeholder group meetings are for the community to give us their input on what they are looking for in a superintendent, correct?
Well, we ask 4 questions that help us. And so I'll tell you what they are. What's good about the community, which helps us to recruit? The second question is, tell us what's good about the district, which again is part of a recruiting mechanism that we use. The third question is, what are the issues the new superintendent is going to face as they come into the district? Budget shortfalls, curriculum, construction issues, whatever those are, people, and it's amazing how consistent the answers are from all the groups. People know and understand what the issues are. And the last question is, what are the characteristics, qualities, and experiences you would expect to see in the next superintendent? So you're going to be getting information about what people's expectations are. We're going to be getting information that help us with the recruiting and vetting as well. So those are the 4 questions, and we gather that data and provide you with the responses that we've received.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then in addition, then the community interviews are down in the February 6th to 10th. And so the community would essentially interview the final 3 candidates. Am I seeing that correctly? In that date, in that time frame, the February 6th through the February, the interviews all day, kind of in that time frame. Is that when the community does their interviews of the candidates, or am I wrong in that? And there is no community interview of candidates?
So there's no community-wide interview. There could be a forum where a candidate.
Right, stakeholder groups. Yeah.
Yes, but the interview team itself is comprised of representatives of the community, staff, students, administration.
Okay, right. Thank you. Got it.
So I just have a calendaring type question for us. In order to sort of expedite options for feedback with the board, should we start kind of like we did with COVID, have a standing special meeting date set that we can cancel if we don't have anything that comes up, or we can pull if we do need a meeting to go over something related to this process?
I'll attempt to answer that and then take comment. I had thought that we would want to do an update regularly every 2 weeks, and we could incorporate that within our regular scheduled meetings. The other thing that I've been grappling with a little bit, you used the word expedite, is on to what extent do we want the whole board doing arrangement managing, which then becomes a public meeting? To what extent can the board delegate it? And I'm not sure whether they're so we would be able to have a special meeting if it was a hard kind of decision. We could possibly, if we felt that the board was not keeping up to date, and today's meeting is a little bit like that. We're gathering our thoughts and getting together. I don't think we may even decide we want a workshop so that we understand what's going on better without taking decisions. I see a need to work together to communicate and expedite, and I'm not quite sure what the best formula is. But I'd like anybody else comment on that. I'm willing to. I think we definitely want to say that we're going to have updates at the very least every regular board meeting.
What updates from who?
From us.
You're going to talk.
Yeah, no, the updates, it's certainly very common for us to come in and give you a short presentation about where we are and what's going on. And if we have any concerns, we can express concerns at those every 2 week meetings. It's not going to be a long session. Usually it's things are going as planned. We're on schedule, and then if you have questions, we can answer questions.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I could support having them kind of in our regular board meetings, with the exception of obviously these scheduled board meetings that are on the calendar where the focus will be the search.
We have this meeting, and then the other special meeting is the one right now for the 31st of January. Those would be the 2 really big meetings.
I think what I was concerned about is just the idea that I don't know what will come up in this process, and especially when we get to this kind of flying timeline in the January, February. So I didn't know if there is, and it is an open question. It's not necessarily a suggestion or anything. It's just, is there any value in having a bookmarked date that we know we're all likely to be available if we have to, bigger decision is coming up? And, I would like to think that the every 2 week updates is sufficient, and or there's enough committee type decisions that can just be more informally decided. But if there is, some big update that needs to be had, is there any value in just knowing that every Tuesday in January and February should be held on our calendars just in case something comes up between a meeting that requires maybe a more broad discussion or something. We did it during COVID. That's the only reason I thought about it. It doesn't necessarily need to be that formal. I think we're pretty flexible when it comes to calling special meetings as needed. So, yeah.
I think it's not a bad idea. Just to at least have it tentatively on the schedule, and if we don't need it, then we just cancel it. Yeah. I do have another question when we're done with that topic.
Okay. I think for today, what I'd like to say is that we will plan to have it every 2 weeks with a regular meeting, and let's take stock, because I don't think it's that constructive to say we're going to have it and we're going to cancel them a lot of the time, particularly when we're dealing with McPherson and Jacobson's time as well. I see sometimes an update not necessarily being from the consultants, but let's say we're talking about the stakeholder meetings and there's a timetable and they're coming, is we can say these are the people who are having them, and that's their timetable, and that could be done in a regular board meeting. If the regular board meetings don't keep pace, then we can change. Okay, Laura, you had another question.
Yes. So my question is about, I heard the term forum, and I've lost track of where the forum piece belongs in the establishing of the criteria and profile. Is that correct? Or is there a forum? So let me finish the question. So the question is there a time once we've selected finalists where at, the high school or something, each candidate stands up and answers a few questions to anybody in the community who might not that the community would be asking the questions, but that they would come to see the candidates, how they answer the questions. Where is that?
So that would be during the full day interview of your final candidates. That's why, but again, I think you hit a very important point. It's not an open question answer session. It would be submit written questions if you want during that time, and then have an administrative staff member screen them for appropriateness and then ask some of those questions. And the person may only have 30, 45 minutes in a forum situation, maybe as much as an hour, depending upon how we've scheduled our day. But again, it's a controlled forum. It's not a free for all. And I think there's a lot of good reasons for that. Sometimes people are always thoughtful about the questions they ask. But yeah, that would be an open forum. Anybody could come and attend that. Staff members, community members, students. It is somewhat limited because there are only so many questions that can be answered.
Would that forum be more of a listening session, or is that a forum where attendees can provide feedback?
The attendees can provide feedback through the written process. You can either do it on a SurveyMonkey, which is easy to set one up for each of the candidates, or you can ask them to provide written input that's gathered and collected after the meeting and then provided to the board for their deliberation after the end of their last interview.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you want to move on to your next item.
Okay, I'm going back to share screen, and let me see what I can do here. And make it larger. Okay, let's see. Is that sufficient? Can people see this?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, this is a compilation of what I heard people say in my interviews with the board members. So we're looking for what are the characteristics, the qualities, the experiences, the traits that people would like to see in the next superintendent. This is an important part of the process because that begins part of the application, part of the brochure, etc. So people can then see what you're looking for and highlight their experiences and skill set in those areas for you. It really drives the process. It also drives the interview questions. So it's an important part of this whole hiring process. Let me just, should I read through them, or the board has them in front? how would you like me to proceed? Want me to read through them?
No, but maybe you can go one at a time and ask for comments on each one. We've all participated and read this, and that way, is that? No, in other words, comments on the first one, any no, comments on the second one, any no.
I see. Okay.
That, okay, you don't like that? All right, what do you want to do?
Too prescriptive.
Well, one of the ways of doing this is to have the board review them if they hadn't had a chance to look at them and see if there are any glaring errors. Like I believe that I've captured most of the intent, the concerns that people have expressed. There's really quite a common theme about the kinds of things that you're looking for in your next superintendent. So if the board chooses, they could review the list and ask questions and say, you didn't add something that's very important to me.
I reviewed the list in advance and I thought this list was very comprehensive. Maybe after further discussion among the rest of the board, something might pop up, but my initial thought on this list, it's very comprehensive and it's true to what I felt is what we're looking for.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to review it in advance and it looked consistent with kind of what my comments and feedback were, and I don't have anything different to add at this point.
I had an opportunity to review in advance and I'm not seeing the thing that I thought I saw, so maybe I saw it somewhere else. Regarding stick-to-itiveness to the existing strategic plan and the big six, it's in there. Okay, I didn't see it. And then I saw, one bullet point related to bilingual and bicultural in Spanish desired, which I think is appropriate. I would like to see somewhere in there, and maybe it's already there, an emphasis on all students succeed, all students can learn, rigor for all students, something along that, addressing the student body as a whole and a commitment to their success.
Okay. Easily added.
I also had a look at this. If nobody else wants to speak, I'll go now. I have one sentence that I have a certain amount of ill at ease about. We rightly say, and have said all along, we're committed to our strategic plan. And our strategic plan is about the whole person as a student. We as a district have a tradition of arts and CTE and AVID, and we just added ROTC. We've got financial literacy. We are a district in our strategic plan that focuses on the whole student, not just on the core curriculum. And so I'm not comfortable with the addition of one who sticks to teaching and learning and the core curriculum, because I think our strategic plan is a whole student strategic plan, and our traditions are to be I don't know what you call it, a big venue for students to develop their to be future ready is the one phrase we're using nowadays. I think that's really important, and that's more than just core curriculum.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Because I heard the core curriculum from several board members, but I also understand what I'm hearing about the whole child or the future ready piece. And maybe I can draft something that works for both of those concepts, because I don't think that they're mutually exclusive.
I agree with that. And thank you for bringing that up, because I was feeling that as Martin was commenting. So I appreciate that.
And I think that's a wise and generous comment that we can put it together, and that's what we should be doing. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's a mention, the commitment to the strategic plan, but it doesn't really elaborate. Some of the other points hit that, but I think maybe breaking it down a little bit more of those big six. And I don't recall them from the top of my head.
Yeah. So other than that I wanted to just say that I thought this, looking at everybody's ideas and the way you put them together, I think this looks like a very satisfactory, good package.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comments about the characteristics? Again, a key piece, if there's something that, you know, you wake up at 2 o'clock tonight and think, oh my gosh, didn't say that, feel free to send me your comments and I can bounce that off staff and get it out to people for their comments to me, not to back to individual board members. We don't want to have any serial board meetings or meetings outside of the public view. Okay, good. That's good. We'll make some modifications and get that back out to you very quickly. Let me get rid of my screen share. One of the things, and we don't have the data for an in-depth discussion tonight, but I'd like a general comment from board about compensation. Is the feeling of the board that the compensation that was provided to the previous superintendent adequate? And again, we'll be checking with some other districts and see what your last compensation study provided. And we'll go from there, but I'd like a general consensus or at least thought about what the compensation package. Do you feel it's competitive?
Can we go around, because I'll do a confession first, because I believe we have not done one related to looking ahead to 2023. We have done some work. So I've already informed Dr. Lauder of what I thought we didn't have. I think your question is very valid, and it would be really important for each board member to give their not necessarily completely informed opinion, because we haven't had a chance to research it, but your feeling about it.
I'll go. So we hired our prior superintendent 3 years ago, correct? Three and a half, whatever. And at the time, the board offered sort of a scaled down compensation packet. And then midway through his term, the board met and revised the compensation package to be more compatible and with what is considered to be competitive in the industry. So I feel like we did review at least the components, and at that time, the salary and benefits. And I am not opposed to checking in to make sure that it's still within the range of what's currently competitive. But I think that we have done that within the last 2 years, I believe.
Yeah, I think we need to know kind of what is competitive in the market now, especially given all the inflationary factors and those types of things. I think it was competitive at the time. You can make some editorials about what I thought, whether it was earned, but as far as I understood, it was competitive. But I think we need to look at comparables now before we can set even a range. And then we need to look at our own budget to find out really what is sustainable as well. I mean, we'd pay the moon if we could, but what is realistic during these times? So
I feel we need to be competitive. If we're going to try to recruit a highly qualified, we need to be competitive to what's, and yeah, I'm pretty sure it's changed in the last couple of years. You know, obviously being fiscally responsible is part of our role. But I think we're going to need to be competitive from the area. And of course have a range, you know, years of experience is going to make a difference.
I'm going to repeat, well, let's say what I think. I think at the time we felt it was competitive and it was also budget prudent. And I think it's not that out of date. The contract we have goes through the end of 2024. But as Julie said, the inflation has changed dramatically during 2022. There's an inflation clause in our contract, but we'll have to see what the state happens. So I think my feel was that we thought we were in both a competitive and a responsible place, but we better do I said the word backfill, a better study to be sure when we actually want to recruit the most competent candidates. But I have a question. If you're going out and advertising the position, at what point do you need to really signal? I know that state law is about to change. I don't know whether it affects this kind of position in terms of declaring compensation, but how could you comment on what you think is important for you to be able to place publicity and attract candidates at this point, above and beyond us saying we did it fairly recently and it looked not too bad?
So what I'll do is suggest this. I've requested a copy of that last contract so I can take a look at the numbers. And again, like I said, I'm reaching out to some statewide contacts about what they think may be competitive. And I'm going to ask Gustavo to weigh in on this too. What's easy to do and can be very appropriate unless the compensation is woefully low, is you can say current compensation is such, but it will be competitive and negotiable based upon experience. So that's a standard kind of set point. If your compensation is within reason, and it sounds like it will be based upon the comments I've heard tonight, Gustavo.
No, I agree. I think people just want to make sure it's competitive, and so we can advertise as being competitive and competitive to the current market, to the current size of the district. And I think, Steve, like you mentioned, you'll get the contract and we'll do some investigation across the state in terms of what's comparable right now for like districts on that side of the state as well.
That sounds good to me. And if when you put feelers out to the state, you see something that's a red flag, we need to know immediately. The other comment that I made, and that was part of our history, is when we've attempted to get comparative compensation, generally speaking, you get salaries, and the benefits package can be pretty rich. And that's always, for us, has been very difficult to get through HR departments. And so I think if you look at our contract, some outside external comment on our benefits package, that also might be relevant, looking for things that could trip us up.
Sometimes the HR departments are a little reticent to provide that information, even though that's public. It's public information. The superintendent contract and compensation package is public, so you really can't hide it. And one of the ways of kind of getting around the reticence of some of the HR employees is to just request a copy of the current contract. And then you can read through and see what's listed, because you can't pay the superintendent if it's not listed in the contract, unless there's some obscure board policy that talks about a particular class of employee, which is a class of one. So that's usually not a good idea to do that kind of stuff. It's bad practice. So yes, we'll do that. I think we're going to be okay to say current salary is thus and so, and competitive and negotiable based upon experience. And I think that's going to work well. Again, unless there's a problem, and I don't expect there to be one.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have direction. We're going to make a modification of the proposed timeline. Again, that can be fungible and change during the process if we need be. And we have direction on some modifications on the characteristics that we'll try to accomplish and get out to everyone tomorrow. And also have direction on how to list compensation unless there's an issue. And I'll get that out to you as well, and with a comment so that the board can see what our thoughts are on that. Any other comments or questions from the board at this time?
Right. No, well, thank you very much for this, more than an introduction and kind of a first steps forward. Appreciate that.
I was going to ask Dr. Balderas if he had any other comments. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, please do.
No, I guess just going back to the initial conversation we had, the beginning of the conversation regarding the community not feeling valued in terms of community voice. I think our process is making sure that we circle back and loop back around to the community in terms of how their voice is being used and how the board is really utilizing the community voice and being very transparent with comments. For example, as Steve mentioned, Dr. Lauder mentioned being very public with the comments, but also, again, the board during public sessions just making sure that that it's clearly expressed how the board is utilizing the community information, whether it's staff, students, or broader community, to ensure that there's again this feedback loop, because a lot of times it is a one-way loop, and that's where I think in some systems it doesn't build trust if it's not a two-way loop. So just making sure that there's clarity in that two-way loop in terms of how information is being utilized.
Thank you. I think that really is important, and to do that clearly and have everybody understand. It's incredibly valuable to get the input, but it isn't the decision. Yeah. And the only other thing I was thinking a little bit is we're talking about the first stakeholder groups. We've got 2 days planned, probably the week after Thanksgiving. All the board members have been asked to make suggestions to Kim White as the hub. And I think we have time to format that group. We have what happened 4 years ago. So I'm hopeful that that can be arranged satisfactorily, and that the extra 2 weeks in a way will make it easier to put it together.
I'd like to thank the board for the opportunity to share this tonight, and we appreciate the feedback. I think it was very productive, and it's very helpful for us to provide you with that process that you desire to get to the end point of getting the best superintendent for your community and your district. So thank you for that.
Thank you both very much. We look forward to working with you. We're privileged to have your expertise helping us, and wish you a good evening. And at that point, nothing else, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you.